19. Creepiest abandoned hospitals. Hospitals are not the greatest of places at the best of times, so imagine those that have been abandoned and left to rot over the course of time. Asylums that house those that should have been looked after with love and care as opposed to being locked up to live the rest of their days under inhumane circumstances, and hospitals that did experiments on POWs with stories that would make your skin crawl. Number 19. Danvers Lunatic Asylum. Time to plaster on our brave faces and make our first stop at the Danvers Lunatic Asylum in Massachusetts. This sinister hospital was opened in 1878 and served as part prison and part asylum. This institution was opened to house mentally unstable criminals, but it was also home to the mentally disabled, alcoholics, and just regular criminals. During the 1930s, the institution was so understaffed that patients wouldn't survive a night, but it wasn't discovered until days or weeks later. Shock therapy and lobotomies were the norm, and there's a huge graveyard on site that's thought to be haunted. The actual building was said to have inspired Batman's Arkham Asylum, and just to add one more thing to the creepy factor, Danvers used to be Salem Village. Yep, add witches to the mix. Number 18. Magdalene Asylum. We're off to the little city of Cork in Ireland and heading to Magdalene Asylum. I promise we won't overstay our welcome. This institution used to house fallen women, the words used to describe any woman who worked in prostitution. It operated from 1765 to 1996, and it wasn't until a mass grave close to the hospital was discovered that the government began investigating the hospital. Turns out the nuns that worked there were violent and abusive towards their patients, with many not pulling through their traumatic ordeals. Number 17. Metropolitan State Hospital. Here's a hospital that has so many stories attached to it we're not even sure which ones to pick. It opened in Massachusetts in 1930, and forming part of the hospital was the Gabler Children's Center. Children that were sent there may as well have been sent to prison. Discipline was strictly enforced, and children were often sedated. There's a story, which hasn't been confirmed yet, that says many patients were accidentally poisoned in the pediatric psychic unit during the 60s. The most macabre story is how the hospital got the nickname the Hospital of Seven Teeth. Patient Anna Marie Davy went for a walk in 1978 and never returned. 2 years later, another patient, Melvin Wilson, admitted guilt and showed police where her body had been buried at 3 different sites, and as a souvenir, he had kept 7 of her teeth. The hospital shut down in 1992 and has since been replaced with condos. The administration building still stands. Number 16. Ararat Lunatic Asylum. It's known today as Airedale, which has a much friendlier ring than Ararat Lunatic Asylum. This was the largest asylum to open in Australia in 1867, and they used to practice some bizarre treatment methods, most of them horrifying and inhumane. The clinic operated for 130 years, and 13,000 patients entered the hospital and never left, and for that reason, it's actually considered one of the most haunted spots in Australia. The facility shut its doors in 1998, and strangely, someone took a big chance and reopened it 3 years later as the Australian College of Wine. Many claim to see ghosts, and you can do a haunted tour of some parts of the building, including the morgue. Number 17. Severall's Hospital. Up to 2,000 patients at a time stayed at Severall's Hospital in Colchester, Essex, UK, which opened its doors in 1913. This hospital took in patients that weren't all ill, but also included women who had been violated or were pregnant with an illegitimate child. This psychiatric ward was known to experiment with electroconvulsive therapy and lobotomies, and there was no limit to what the staff were allowed to test on the unwilling patients. Fortunately, come the 60s, straitjackets were replaced with drugs and patients were better looked after overall. However, that doesn't mean that shadowy figures and the spirits of those lost too soon don't linger in the decaying passageways today. Number 14. Beechworth Lunatic Asylum. This used to be known as the Mayday Hills Lunatic Asylum, but today, many know it as La Trobe University's Beechworth campus. For 128 years, this asylum made the lives of those staying there a living hell, if they even survived at all. Over 9,000 patients didn't live to tell the tale, and the term lunatic was used to describe those with even the most minor symptoms. The ghosts of many people are said to linger there, including Matron Sharp doing her rounds, desperate faces staring out the windows, and the spirit of Tommy Kennedy, who used to transport the deceased out of the asylum. But go check it out yourself. Ghost tours take place every evening. Number 13. Denby Asylum. All that remains is a dilapidated building, but in its heyday, Denby Asylum was home for up to 1,500 people and officially shut its doors in 1995. The hospital was built between 1844 and 1848 and was intended as a refuge for mental patients from Wales. Originally only meant to house 200 people, they had to quickly expand to accommodate their swelling numbers. It's now a derelict building that's been looted and vandalized. It was meant to become homes and businesses, but that fell through. It was featured on an episode of Most Haunted, and in that same year, a fire broke out in the building and crippled it even more. Its fate is still uncertain. Number 12. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Eerily similar to our previous entry, this is the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum located in West Virginia, USA. This building followed the Kirkbride design, which was quite common for asylums during the 19th century, which is probably why it looks so similar to the earlier post. There have been reports of patient abuse, and with that, a bit of paranormal activity. The center closed in 1994 and is now a National Historic Landmark. Number 11. Guardloch Hospital. This foreboding structure looks like it has a story or two to tell, and not all of them pretty. This abandoned hospital was opened in 1896 in Guardloch, Scotland. It had 830 beds at its busiest, which was in 1904. It was initially meant to house the mentally unstable, but also served as a tuberculosis sanatorium until the end of World War II. It closed its doors in 1996, and the last update for the building was that it was being developed into a luxury village, which we're sure has been completed by the time this is being published. Number 10. Beals Hospital. The building goes back to 1898, where the land was bought by Germany to build a tuberculosis sanatorium and nursing home. That didn't last too long, because when the war began, those patients were removed and the Red Cross took over and had over 1,500 beds for the injured. The hospital was in and out of use until 1994, and then thereafter, anyone who took the time to explore the creepy wards. Some are easily accessible, and others are locked up. Definitely worth a visit. Number 9. Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital. This building was put up to alleviate overcrowding at the other, already very full mental asylum in New Jersey. This building was meant to house 350 patients, and at one stage there were 7,674 people inside. The only tales of disaster coming from the hospital was the overcrowding, with cots being pulled into hallways at night so the patients could sleep, and often those cots were soiled, not cleaned due to a lack of staff, and dragged out again the following night. It closed in 2003 and has since been demolished. Number 8. Trenton State Hospital. We mentioned earlier that there was already an asylum in New Jersey that was overcrowded, hence why they built Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital. It was the New Jersey State Lunatic Asylum, later known as Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. This hospital had a very dodgy past. Dr. Henry Cotton was the director of the hospital from 1907, and he believed that infections caused mental illnesses. He would end up removing any appendage that was infected. Number 7. Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Originally opened in 1910, this hospital was built to house tuberculosis patients. There were 63,000 who didn't survive their time in Waverly, and their treatments were horrifying. They inserted balloons into patients' chests, they removed ribs to make more space to try to make breathing easier, and also removed muscle tissue, hoping for the same results. Several apparitions have been reported over the years. Number 6. Lennox Castle Hospital. Built in the 1830s, this is Scotland's Lennox Castle Hospital. In 1936, it became an infamous psychiatric hospital. The hospital started off well, but over time became overcrowded, underfunded, and understaffed. The staff allegedly tried their best, but one doctor described it as a pit, that he was sick to the stomach about the plight of these poor people. Punishment was dealt out harshly, and patients who forgot to address someone as Sir had to do laps around the castle barefoot. It closed in 2002 and is now a training ground for the Celtic Football Club. Number 5. Heartwood Hospital. Here's another 19th century abandoned psychiatric hospital in Scotland called Heartwood Hospital. It opened in 1895 and was completely self-sustaining. Some treatments included seclusion, electroconvulsive therapy, and lobotomies. It was the biggest asylum in Europe during the 50s and also struggled with overcrowding. It shut its doors in 1998 but was used for other purposes since then. However, the last report suggests it has been closed and abandoned since 2002. Number 4. Leassick Hospital. It was 1926 when Leassick Hospital opened its doors in Lea, Norway. This mental asylum is said to be one of the most haunted spots in Norway. It's been left empty since 1985, but there are some stories of ghosts, shadows, and noises that still linger. Between 1945 and 1974, it's alleged that new drug testing took place on patients that pharmacy companies didn't even want to test on animals. But a lot of the stories could just be folklore. There is a part of the building that is still home to some patients. Number 3. Poveglia Island. Here's an entire island that has been deserted, that once served as a quarantine for Black Plague victims. Considered one of the most haunted places in Italy, this island prohibits any visitors. A mental hospital opened in 1922, and due to the island being so isolated, the rumors that came from that place were pretty horrific. The hospital operated until 1968. Number 2. Stranger Things. If you've ever watched the series Stranger Things, this abandoned hospital looks a lot like Hawkins' lab. We don't know the name of this place, perhaps they don't want people heading there, but it's located in California, and a couple of guys went to check it out. They've uploaded their video on YouTube. They're called The Proper People, and what they found most disturbing was that the lights were still on. As some commentators have pointed out, it's probably the backup generators, but surely even those would have switched off if the building was empty. There seems to be a lot of unanswered questions about this eerie spot. Number 1. Narron. This is located in Vienna, Austria, and it was Europe's first asylum built in 1784. Currently, it's the Anatomical Pathological Museum, and it's home to 4,000 abnormalities, including deformed fetuses and models of untreated STDs. Have you ever visited any of these creepy hospitals? Would you? If so, share your experience with us in the comments below and subscribe to our channel for more daily videos. Thanks for watching.